How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, the we're going to do is going to be the board breaker tier list for the new format. The format is not set in stone by any means. There's going to be a lot of innovation moving forward. There's also a lot of factors that we have to include, things like mulch armies, shifter, impulse, and then especially with a lot of these too, just because you see a board breaker pretty high up doesn't mean that your deck can actually play that. So play the highest one on here that you can, because for example, spear mode, right now, I think spear mode is the best board breaker there is, right alongside lava. Lava might arguably be better, to be honest, because not every board is going super wide, especially if you open Fuaros, your opponent ends on a half board, and you have lava golem. Kinda crazy, I'm not gonna lie. So I think that these are like S tier board breaks right now. They're absolutely absurd. But you might need your normal summon. So these might not be the ones for you. But we'll talk more about these as we move along. But just to start, I am putting both of these in S tier. They have been broken. They are broken. If you can slap these on a board, you're going to have a very good time. So if you are looking for something that's going to be really clean into a big board, you might want to consider playing like 3 lava, 2 spear, or like 3 spear, 2 lava, just to make sure that you can see one of these, because I think that they are both really strong. Now, next up here, we're going to be looking at the steel cards. Honestly, like C tier, I don't think they're that good. They're really not. It's just one of those things where the cards used to be very strong, but even into a board now where it's like Sylvia, Desiree, these just don't cut it the way that other cards will. So in my opinion, I think that these are both fairly weak, and these are probably not things that you'd actually want to run on your side. They will come back, I'm sure, but as of right now, they are not that strong. For the next S tier board breaker, Cosmic Cyclone, really good in Centurion. It's really strong into anyone summoning a Desiree, because if your opponent uses Desiree's effect, you can go ahead and chain Cosmic to the link 2 that's attached to it, and then all of a sudden the effect goes away, which is fantastic, and that's a really good way to be able to bait interaction. So that kind of falls into my A tier board breaker, which is going to be Talent. I think that Talent is fantastic, but usually it's when it's something and something else. So Talent alone has actually seen a lot less play, and even in a lot of the Snake Eye lists, you might see 1 Talent and you might see 0 because it's really kind of fallen off in popularity. But in a lot of the more mid-range decks, and even some of the more higher tier decks as well, we are still seeing Talent go in and out of deck lists. So I would say Talent is going to be more of an A tier, but Cosmic has been such a great utility card if you play against Runic even. So there's just so many applications of Cosmic Cyclone that I think are just fantastic at the moment. You should be playing those in your main or side. Even in the main deck, they're not that bad. You can go first and set it against things like Tenpai, or you can just go second and have it, right? So it's really good. Another card here is going to be Imperium. Some of the hand traps that will be in here kind of double up as a board breaker, and we'll talk about that. I think that Imperium is also like A tier. I think that it's really strong. Obviously, it's the one card that just does not play into the talent, and you would probably want like Impulse on here, but Impulse is more of a hand trap to me than a board breaker. I would say that Imperium is more of a board breaker because you're actually able to just use it in your draw phase if you want to, or even main phase to try to bait like an interaction for talent, right? So I think that Imperium, if we're talking about it as a hand trap, it's S tier as a hand trap. But I do think that if we're talking about it as a board breaker, it's more of like an A tier board breaker because you start your turn with it, and it can be really strong if you hit like a window or something, right? And you're just like, wow, like that was crazy. But it's not the best that we could be seeing here. So the next one up here is going to be Regi in Dark Hole. Now, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and just from what Tenpai can do, honestly, they're just setting up an A tier right now. Like, they're surprisingly very strong. And that's something where if you can bait an interaction and then start tearing up the board, you can provide lethal pretty quick. And that's kind of crazy. So right now, I would say that they are very strong because if you can proc talent and make your opponent really start burning resources, I think that's something that really needs to be noted. Now for B tier, I have Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse. I think that both of these are okay. I do not find these to be the most fantastic cards. I think that they're definitely okay, but there could be better ones that you're running at the moment, right? And they have a lot of application. If you're playing Ritual Beast, you can definitely book your own board if you're about to get Nibiru'd, and then you can Nochi Drago and then get rid of both the monsters from a contact fuse and then bring them back, which is pretty crazy. So definitely a few ways that you can really interact with certain board breakers, and that's where in like Ritual Beast, Eclipse would be an S tier card for that deck. But I'm talking about these more generally. So I do hope that that helps you in terms of understanding where my mindset is at when I'm placing these. Next up here is Lightning Storm, and I'm just going to put this with Dark Hole Regeki. I think that a lot of the board breakers right now, whenever you start seeing even like hand traps, where most of them lie at the higher points on a list, then you kind of figure out what kind of a format you're in. There's going to be plenty that fall short of this, but I do think that right now, this is realistically where the format's at. Another one for B tier here is going to be Typhoon. I love this card. I think this card comes up so much, and it's so good. But it's definitely not as good as other cards could be, especially a card like Book of Eclipse that is just a total board breaker. So this one will definitely help you, hitting cards like Nightmare Pain and etc. But I do think that there is a lot of warrant to playing a card like Typhoon right now. It's very strong. The next one here, I would say, is going to be like the top of B tier would be Evenly. And not every deck can realistically run this because most times you're just trying to kill and set up a decent enough line in main phase to just call battle. And a lot of decks really do suffer if you trade your battle phase for something like an Evenly, because of the fact that you have so many lines to go ahead and break the board and attempt to lethal, that there's not a whole lot of opportunity to even want to use something like an Evenly match. That's where cards like Lightning Storm are just objectively better, because this works a lot better in combo decks to just go ahead and blow out the back row, and then you can just deal with the monsters, or vice versa. But I do think that Evenly is a bit worse. It's like fine, but I think that these cards are just objectively better right now because you don't have to trade your battle phase for it. The next one here is going to be a very old card, and I'm going to put it in food for thought. Striker is the deck that I made the channel with, right? That was one thing that I played all the time, and it was a lot of fun being able to just kind of run through tournaments with a deck that a lot of people really didn't expect to see. One of the things that I got really comfortable with was IO being in the format when that was a huge issue. I played Spiritualism because it's the only spell card that you can activate under IO that just straight up clears IO, because it can't get negated and you return a spell or trap to your opponent's hand. So being able to just rip Spiritualism and target something like a sequence is kind of broken because it can't get negated. So you just straight up trade for the negate, which is pretty cool. And I don't really know if this is going to end up being like super prevalent, but it's also really nice into Runic, because if you're playing against Runic and they have Fountain up, usually you can deal with what's on board, but the Fountain is what's giving them crazy amounts of interaction with you and extra draws. So if you start your turn off in main phase going activate Spiritualism, target Fountain, yeah, they might be able to rip off like a destruction on you real fast from hand, but it's kind of nice to have. So think about that, because I think it's pretty cool. The next one here being Duster, it's just going to be in B tier. It's Duster. It's really good when it is. It's really bad when it's not. And it's a one-off that's really hard to find unless you have Thrust. So it's fine, but it's not going to be up as far as like one of the craziest, right? Now, one more for the S tier is going to be Dark Ruler. Now, this is another thing that you do trade your battle phase, but I think that the matchups where you want Dark Ruler, it just matters. Because Evenly can just straight up get negated by something like a Desiree, The Dark Ruler requires your opponent to have something like an Azaroon to chain to make sure that they can actually use Desiree to negate it. You force out a lot of cards with something like Dark Ruler, and then if they don't have the card to chain, and then you can just resolve the Dark Ruler, you're in a very good position because you can just spend your main phase 1 just comboing as you want to, and then you can still battle through your opponent's board and break things as needed. So I think that Dark Ruler right now is fantastic. I think this is a main deckable card in a lot of different strategies at the moment, especially if you're playing something like Ritual Beast. It's just very strong to have around right now. Its counterpart Droplet is going to be an A tier. I think that it's a little worse than Dark Ruler. It's still insanely strong. It's still Droplet and it's still top of A tier. But I do think that Dark Ruler has a little bit of an edge on it at the moment. Just because that card is just a one trade, and not every deck is going to have cards that they can just openly send for Droplet. So I think that Dark Ruler is definitely up in S tier. It is a really broken board breaker right now. As for Nibiru, I would put it as like top of B. I think that this is another card where it's like really broken when it's really strong, and then it's just the most mid card when it's just awful. And Nibiru will always end up being in the format. And even if someone tells you that it's not a hand trap format, it's not a Nibiru format, that means that it's automatically a Nibiru format because no one's expecting it. So I think that it's always in this weird limbo where it's like real crazy and it's just so bad. So I would put it at top of B because I'm still always playing it because the card's insane, just in general. But just know that sometimes when you play it, it's not going to be that good. It's going to be kind of mid, but still pretty strong. Now, the other thing, though, is going to be the Runic cards, using Runic cards as a board breaker. Now, a lot of times, the Runic cards aren't the broken cards. They can be when they're looped 100 times, but usually it's the floodgates that come behind the Runic cards. So, in my opinion, I would say that the Runic cards as board breakers are pretty mid. I would say like C, like top of C, because again, you're realistically trying to set floodgates past your opponent, flip the floodgate, and then when they respond to you, you respond with like Runic cards to try to protect it, right? So for me, I would say that makes the Runic cards feel a lot worse. So that's something where I think that Runic is fine, but usually it's in tandem with something else like a White Forest. So those as board breakers are a lot less appealing. Unfortunately, my favorite way to break a board was always Shaddoll Fusion, and I'd probably put it in don't now because Appaloosa just isn't a card. You could always chain block the Opcalone to go ahead and negate the Appaloosa, which was really nice, and then get like a free banish or draw or back row pop. And I always thought this card was so good. But just because most of like the crazier end boards end with like Desiree, this card's like so underwhelming. So I just would not. It's a lot of cards to commit to your deck anyway. There's better things to play. I probably just wouldn't. Now for the middle of B tier, I would say Super Poly. I think Super Poly is really solid right now. I think that it's very strong. Being able to hit Sylvia and Desiree and make something like a Dragostopelia, or just hitting like an Azaroon and a Rabbit. Like there's so many different ways that you can utilize Super Poly that is so strong. And then also if you're playing against a lot of different matchups, like the Runic matchups, you can use Super Poly to at least dodge some of those cards that can be more problematic. So I do think this is a card that if you already run the Super Poly targets or you have room for them, that I would. I think Super Poly is very cool. It's very good. Definitely not the strongest right now, but it's very strong. Kaijus, I would say probably like bottom of C tier. I don't think that they're worth it. They do not clear enough. I think that if you're going to tribute monsters, then tribute monsters, right? But just Kaijus alone don't do it. At least not right now. They're not very good. Ogre, I'd probably put up next to Typhoon. They're effectively the same card. Effectively. Metaltronus, I would probably put it just under Runic cards. I think Metaltronus is a lot worse now because it can get impulsed and ashed. So that sucks. The card itself is really strong and it's really effective, but I don't think that it's that good. Then we got Alpha, which is just don't. I don't like this card. Maybe you'll find success with it. I don't like it. I don't think that it's very strong. And then I would say Pank is probably above the steel cards. Again, just pretty underwhelming for what it is right now, and I'm sure that we'll find more times where it's a lot better. Maybe when we see the Fiendsmith cards leave, but at least right now, it's not really been like that good. But maybe we'll see it move up. This is where I'm at with my tier list and the board breakers. I can do a lot more in-depth video talking about the board breakers, their better instances, their better matchups. Just let me know if that's something that you would like to see, and I'll see you all in the next video. I appreciate you all. Have a great night. Later.